In this brief tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and talk about how to connect a Mercury controller so that it can communicate back to the ACM enterprise appliance via a wide area network. So many times in certain situations we may have a controller or panel that may go out at a customer site that either gets a public IP address or an address set to it via a router using DHCP, and I want that panel to then communicate back to the head end appliance or the ACM via that either wide area network or local area network using DHCP. So in the graphic that you see in front of you, assuming that my 1501 controller is out at a site where there's a router, on that router I've opened up port 3004 for outbound communications, and also on my router to my appliance I've opened up that same port so that it can see it. So this is kind of the generic, very, very high level overview of what we're trying to accomplish here. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and go into our ACM, and we need to set the communications port. We need to open up the comms port on the ACM so that it can communicate or receive communications from on that specific port into the ACM. So we do this by going up here to the appliance section, clicking on appliance. We're going to go down here right on this main page. It says Mercury Client Connect port. So we're going to enter our port. Now the port that I'm going to use today is port 3004. You could certainly pick whatever port you want as long as you set it appropriately in all your communications controllers. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to 3004, scroll down here and hit the save button. Now the first time that you set this, you will most likely see the appliance do an automatic reboot because it's the first time that you're setting the configuration for that Mercury client port. Anytime after that, it won't require a reboot to adjust that port setting. So because I've used it in the past, it's not doing my reboot, but for you it will do a reboot. So now the next thing we need to do, we've opened up that port. I've opened up that port inbound on my router, so it's allowing communications to come in via and put requests through on 3004 and automatically direct it to my ACM appliance. I'm going to go over here to another tab, and I'm now going to go into the Mercury controller. So I'm going to use the default login and password of admin, and the password is password. And that'll get you into the system configuration setting for the controller itself. Now the first steps that we want to take is we want to go to the network section. We're going to move the radio button from use static IP address up here to use DHCP. You need to make a note of this MAC address. That MAC address is going to be needed on the ACM side so that you can establish communications to the controller. So make a note of that, write that down. Set that radio button and hit the accept down here. Once you've accepted that, you have to go to the host communications section. In this section, this is where we're going to set up how it communicates to the ACM. So I'm going to switch from IP server connect to IP client connect. And I'm going to put in the address or the host IP name, whether you know the dynamic name or an IP address of where the host resides, so that the controller can now attempt to communicate to the host. Remember, we set my port to 3004, so I'm going to change this to 3004, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit accept. You do not need to change anything else on this screen. Just IP client, then go to the host IP, and then the port number. Hit accept. Lastly, you have to apply these settings and reboot the appliance or reboot the controller. So apply those settings, reboot, and go ahead and close that tab. So my controller is going to go through a reboot process. It's going to now connect up to my network using DHCP, get an automatically assigned DHCP address from either my public provider or the router that I've connected it to, and now I'm going to take that MAC address and use that to establish communications to the controller. So I'm going to go into the physical access section. I'm going to click on panels. I'm going to add new panel. My panel, I'm just going to give it a generic name for now. I'm going to call it an EP51. I'm going to mark it installed. It is a Mercury security controller. I'm going to pick the 1501, leave everything else the same, and hit save. It's going to ask me if I have any downstream devices. I don't have any, so I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to go back to the host communications tab, and I'm going to change this to IP client connection. And this is where I have to enter my IP address. It is going to be separated by colons. So it's 00:0F, E5, etc. I go ahead and hit save. And in a few seconds, I should see the controller come online fully, start communicating to the appliance, and establish connection. And there we go. We can see that the panel is online, it's communicating, and no issues. So it's that simple to connect up ACM to a Mercury controller so that the Mercury controller can use standard DHCP addressing for communications purposes to an ACM appliance.